Welcome to another special episode of Honest Money. We're talking about global investing, and unfortunately for me, I'm in the hot seat today. So I'm going to be answering the questions, and I'm very happy that we're joined by Grant Locke, head of Outvest. Grant, thanks so much for joining. This is not the first time we've done this, but I just want to remind you, please go easy on the questions, and let's just get into it for our listeners about global investing. Thanks so much for joining.
Oh, Warren, it's a pleasure to be here, and I think I don't think you can actually say go easy in the questions because you wrote the book or a book on global investing made easy. So I think I'm using that book as my reference point. So I think this should be quite interesting. So I think today, one of the things I actually wanted to cover about global investing is getting the proportion of global allocations right. You see, it's one thing to go out there and think, oh, well, you know what, I just want to invest my money globally and I want to get all these great ideas. But I think there's a lot more that a financial planner thinks about when they talk about global investing. So I think that one of the first things to start with is the why. Or what are you trying to achieve? What is your circumstances when you're investing globally? And that determines what proportion of your money you should actually send offshore. So if you're retired, for example, or if you want to leave the money to your grandkids, that all has an impact on the amount of money you want to send overseas. So let's hear a bit more about some of those scenarios and what you think and where the money should go.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. You know, a lot of the time when we want to send money overseas, it's a bit like saying, you know, I'm going to drive from Joburg to Cape Town, but then you don't have a map, you don't have a GPS, and so you know where you're going and what road are you choosing and why. You know, so I think it's important to have those clear kind of financial roadmaps in a decision like this. And so you're absolutely right. Your stage of life is an important one. And I think also the amount of investments that you have or the amount of capital that you have is a critical thing for me. So for example, if you are someone that's building up money and you're pretty sure that, or even if you've got, you're already retired, if you know that there's a good chance you're going to use most of your money in your lifetime, then I think ideally you should try and have about 25% of your assets invested overseas. You know, that's a good optimal offshore allocation because you are going to spend in rands, you are going to spend most of your money in rands, most of your time in rands, and therefore it makes sense that you take out some of the currency risk of investing, and secondly that you earn the interest and those kinds of things. So I think if you've got just enough money, then 25% is a good number. If you don't have enough money, you're in the same bracket. You know, if you're building up there. The second category would be those people who say, there's a chance that I will leave behind some money to the next generation, to my children, as an example. And if you're going to leave behind some money to your children, then I think your time frame for your money starts to change. In other words, you're not just worried about what happens to your investments for the rest of your lifetime. You're saying there's a good chance that I need to worry about the money into my children's lifetime as well. So you're looking at 25 to 75 years, for example, as a time frame. And when you've got such a long time frame, you need to know that the range of things that could happen are so wide that you need to make sure that you've spread your assets as far and as wide as possible. So you need to increase your overseas allocation. And my view is, if you've got money going to the next generation, it's probably about half of your assets should go overseas. The last category would be those few families that say, we're pretty sure that we've got enough money to go to our children's children. And that could, for example, be even if your own children are only under 10 years old, if you know there's a good chance you're going to leave behind a lot of money.
That's not my situation, but carry on. I'd still like to hear about it.
Yeah, well, you never know. Let's see how we go. So if you're in a situation like that, then I would say you're increasing your overseas allocation to around 75% of your assets. And the reason is there is a good chance that some or all of your children or your children's children won't all be in South Africa. That means they're going to spend money in dollars or pounds or euros or yen or whatever it is. And so you need to make sure that you're covering future expenses and future events that you just cannot predict at the moment. So then people in that category, I always try and give them the example of if you were sitting on the moon and you were the man on the moon and you looked at the world and you said, I'm going to invest money in the world. You're not going to allocate all of that money to one country. Even if it was America or South Africa or the UK, you would spread it as far and as wide as possible. So I think that's, to me, the primary criteria as to how you choose how much to send overseas.
I think that's absolutely sound. I think there's another element to it as well. And one of the other questions is, okay, cool, I'm sending money overseas. I understand the proportion I want to send overseas. But I guess one of the questions is, what currency do I pick? And you just started off now by saying, well, don't just pick one currency. But I think that the home, or the where, as you said in an earlier episode, the home of your money, where it's ordinarily sitting and what currency you place it in, has an impact on it. Now, how do you decide what currency the offshore investment should stay in and why?
So I think it's a great question. So maybe just to clarify, I wouldn't put all my money in one country. That worries me.
Okay.
But I'm quite happy to have it all in one currency. But just to explain what I mean by that. So
please.
If I buy a global index, and that's something I've spoken about, I don't know, hundreds of times on this show and elsewhere. I like the idea of a global index, and for me, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to buy it in dollars. So that doesn't mean that my whole investment, my whole global index will all be in dollars in America, because that global index is going to own probably Toyota, it's going to own some Swiss pharmaceutical companies, I'm sure it's going to own some insurance companies in the UK, etc. So that means I've got exposure to a lot of different countries and a lot of different currencies and a lot of different companies, but eventually all of those come back and they're then priced in dollars. So the reason why I'm okay with that is because if the dollar collapses, the likelihood is that investment will actually do quite well, because a falling dollar means that the rest of the stuff that's not priced in dollars is actually going to become more valuable. So I'm okay with that. And secondly, my primary reason for sending money out of one country and buying another country, another currency, is diversification. So I'm more worried, for example, if I'm in South Africa, I'm worried about spreading my risks out of rands. So once I've done that, I'm not too worried about exactly what the dollar is going to do against the pound or the euro or the yen or whatever it is, because I know I've got a global portfolio and I own all of those currencies in one form or another already. So then it's almost a mechanism and a pricing and a convenience issue, and not so much me being a world expert on currencies and countries.
And I think the other thing is what's available for the domicile or the home of your money. There's probably only a certain range of currencies that you can base your investment is, which will obviously help with your decision. I think if we now have an understanding of what proportion of my wealth to send overseas and an understanding of exactly what the home should be, I think the next thing you need to understand is the time horizon, which then has an impact on exactly what I'm investing in. And bear in mind, we're not even going to the fun stuff yet, which is the index, active versus passive, Bitcoin, cryptos, farmland in some other country, or art, for example. We're actually still talking about the very high level understanding of what type of asset class my money should be domiciled in. When I was reading your book, it made a lot of sense around starting with the plan and then moving on to the time horizon, which will determine the asset class. So I'd like to hear, firstly, how you determine it in terms of your time horizon, but then what asset classes will come out of that and why.
So time horizon's an absolutely critical factor in deciding how much you invest in riskier assets. So, for example, if you're going to invest money for the next 1 to 3 years, you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to send the money to an investment, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to access that money, some or all of it, in the next 1 month or 2 to 3 years. Then you need to know that you really can't afford to take risk with that money. You can't afford to invest in farmland, as you say, or property in general, or in shares, because those are growth assets, which is great when they're going up. But growth assets come with a price, and the price is that they can also go down as well. And so if you know you're going to need your money, let's say you're planning to put down a deposit on a house and you buy the house, and suddenly it's time to get the money to pay the deposit, and you've lost a third of the money because you were in shares and they've gone down, that's an awful scenario. So the time horizon for when you're going to access the money is key in deciding how much risk you can take. And once you know how much risk you can take, it's actually 100% linked to the assets that you choose. So I think if you say, I'm happy to send my money to an investment for 5 years or longer, I actually think almost 5 to 7 years or longer, then you can start to have a huge bias to shares as an asset class. And I think also then we're starting to get into the global space, because I'm really worried to send my money out, to send it overseas to be a global investor if I know I'm going to bring the money back and need it in 3 years' time. It doesn't make sense to me to take the currency risk as well.
But also the costs. I mean, there's the cost in getting the money out, the repatriation cost of getting the money in, the selling, the bid offer spread on your investments. There's a whole lot of cost involved in not just taking it out of the investments, but also repatriating the money back to the country, your home country.
Actually, a brilliant point. I mean, it's a key thing that a lot of us would lose sight of. We just think things go up, investments go up, so we don't have to worry about the costs. And actually, costs in a low return, low interest rate environment could absolutely wipe out any growth you've had. So I think it's a fair point.
I think the other thing is sort of, I mean, we talk about risk a lot, and I think you make the point about risk because people's understanding of risk is my money could go down, which is exactly the behavioral understanding of it. But I think one of the reasons why your time horizon is so critical is because, and as you sort of push it into, as you increase your time horizon, you increase more of your allocation to listed equities, is actually because of inflation. I'd like to hear a bit of your thoughts about why inflation is such a risk.
I feel, I think of inflation in the same way I think of a slow poison. There's no dramatic event that says to you, "Hey, Grant, your cost of living has suddenly, risen, and the buying power of your money has gone." There isn't a headline, unfortunately, that we get in the media that says, "Watch out, your cost of living, for you as a person has now changed," and pay attention. So what happens is, it just gradually eats away at the ability for our money to buy what it used to buy, and that's inflation, and that's the thing that probably keeps me awake at night when I'm planning investments for people. Is they don't look at this. It's not something they focus on. They're so worried about stock markets rising or falling because the media is shouting this at them. It's something that they get bombarded with, but if they can't let the buying power of their investments grow at a rate that's at least growing the same pace as the buying power of their money is being eroded, they're going backwards. And it's that slow poison is just awful. And unfortunately, by the time people realize it, they can't make it up anymore.
No, that's what happens in retirement. You're 10, 15 years into retirement, suddenly you wake up one morning and the income that gets paid out of your annuity is not enough to be able to afford the things that you need to maintain your standard of living. And that's really the risk. And I think, and I think your metaphor of using it as a poison is probably, I've never heard it before, and I think it's a phenomenal metaphor because that's exactly what it is. It's a slow erosion of your money, but it impacts on what you do with yourself every single day.
Yeah.
So I think, the other point to make is that, over the last 120 years that we've been looking at market data, the only asset class that we know of that has reliably outperformed inflation with a decent margin has been listed equities.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons, that's the major reason why, as the time horizon increases, that we start to use a greater allocation to listed equities in the portfolios. So I think, the one other thing that I think, it's not directly related to global investing, but when I was reading your book, I came across this Bengen rule. We were talking about the plans, and we were talking about an understanding of, how much money you need. Have you got just enough money in retirement? And I thought to myself, this is a great way for me to do a back of the max spot calculation to understand, do I just have enough money? How much of my money can I send overseas? So just take us through the Bengen rule, please.
Well, I want to make it maybe a bit simpler because every time we give a name to something, people lose us. So just saying to people, if you want to know how much you need to retire, or what's your lotto number, then take your expenses and figure out how much are you going to spend in a year. So now what you've got to do is you've got to say, these are my regular monthly expenses, so whatever that is, times it by 12. But don't forget that you might buy a car every 5 years, and so take the 5-year amount divided by 5 to get to an annual amount that you're going to allocate to a car. Add a holiday amount, add any other kind of irregular expenses that come up. If you pay for kids' education every year, whatever the deal is, put all those expenses together and then times it by 25. And that will tell you how much you need to get to retirement. It's your financial freedom number. Retirement sounds like such a boring thing.
Okay,
it's your financial freedom number. The thing is, when you do that for the first time, you might think, gee, I'm way off. This whole thing's pointless.
Never going to work. Yeah.
What you need to do is do it once a year. Because what happens now is when you realize that actually, I needed 25 million and I've only got one. Next year, if you've got 2 and you only need 25.2 million, you're starting to close the gap. And that's actually what's important here. Is not what's the actual number, and I'm never going to get there. It's about saying, let me keep closing that gap as I go.
And I think that, getting back to global investing, if you know what your number is, you get an understanding of what proportion of your investments you should be sending offshore. And I think that's very, very important from getting an understanding of the proportion of your global allocation in your portfolio. Warren, thank you very much. This has been phenomenal. I can't wait for the next episode, and I'm grateful for your insights.
Thanks so much, Grant. I enjoyed it.